Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, brace yourself, Mexico.
Nos coordinamos, colaboramos, pero nunca nos subordinemos.
How Trump's return could destabilize the U.S.'s neighbors to the south. I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. No country, besides the U.S., of course, has felt the brunt of the new American presidency faster and sharper than Mexico. In his first week in office, Trump left thousands of would-be refugees stranded in Mexico and is still committed to deporting millions. He declared cartels terrorist organizations and threatened to slap a 25% tariff on all Mexican goods by February 1st. Now, just one of those problems would be a problem for the Mexican government, but all four combined have the makings of a full-blown crisis. Julia Galiano is a journalist, and she's been watching all of this unfold from Mexico City. So, Julia, welcome to The Take. Let's start with the big picture. Trump left no room for interpretation during his inaugural speech. The border remains his top priority.
First, I will declare a national emergency at our southern border.
He wants mass deportations, which could mean millions of Mexicans living in the United States are just sent home. So to start, tell us how Mexico is getting ready for this potentially massive deportation effort on both sides of the border.
Right. Well, obviously since the campaign and certainly since he won in November, Trump has made no secret of what his plans were. So the Mexican government has had some time. In terms of what they've been doing in Mexico specifically, there was the announcement not too long ago of some 25 shelters opened along the border to take in the possible deportees. There's been, budgets reallocated throughout the country to deal with a possible crisis. States on the border have declared a state of emergency, specifically the state of Baja California or in the city of where Tijuana's in, which is usually on a normal year or month where most people are deported. None of this may sound like it's the type of preparations that would be needed for measures of the magnitude that Trump has threatened. But the reality is that there's not that much more that Mexico can currently do. I mean, they're still hoping, I think the Mexican president and the Mexican government is still hoping to have some room for negotiation. And they've been very clear about that, specifically the president. She's saying that she's not going to get caught up in the discourse and in what's said publicly, but that, what actually ends up happening is going to depend largely on negotiations between the foreign ministers of the two countries.
It is important always to keep a cool head and refer to the decrees signed beyond the speech itself.
She has made it clear again and again that Donald Trump's way of doing politics is this very, media, loud kind of, big statements way of speaking and of threatening actions. But she's saying that she's going to focus on the actual, on what's written on these executive orders, on what actually starts happening and what actually gets agreed upon.
Yeah, there are millions of Mexicans who are living in the United States. So there are things that have to be done inside the United States to care for those citizens, right?
Right. So before even announcing what was going to happen on the Mexican side of the border, she did kind of put all the Mexican consulates in the U.S. on alert. The Mexican president, announced the creation of this app. She says that Mexicans can basically press, it's a panic button of sorts, that if they are in a situation where they feel they're about to be detained by immigration authorities, they can press this panic button and it would send a message to the nearest consulate. She is obviously making all these Mexican consulates across the U.S. available for advice and so forth, obviously opening the door to those who want to, repatriate, come back to Mexico willingly if they feel like maybe, that they don't want to go through this very stressful process of fearing that you're about to be deported. But again, all of that is, limited to some degree. She, at the end of the day, won't have much control once, things actually start happening beyond what can be arranged in negotiations between the two governments. And Mexico, I think, does have some leverage. All this is happening in the context of the lowest number of migrants in 4 years, at least, arriving at the border. The border is actually quite quiet these days.
Donald Trump is inheriting the quietest border in years. Fewer than 50,000 unauthorized border crossings were reported in December after outgoing President Joe Biden tightened asylum rules.
So it shows Mexico's leverage because they have worked very hard to keep those migrants from reaching the U.S. border. So they clearly can do it. And that, I think, is their biggest leverage, because if they don't do that, we go back to looking at these images of, tens of thousands of people at the border. And that creates a problem for the U.S. as well.
So the problem, though, is really twofold, right? Mexico has to prepare for all these people potentially coming back from the States, from the North, while also continuing to deal with people coming from the South and getting stacked up if the border closes. I mean, as we speak, there are thousands of people from all over Latin America just mired in transit in Mexico. And then the news this week is that Trump says he wants to reinstate Remain in Mexico.
Former President Donald Trump used the policy then known as the Migrant Protection Protocols to send more than 70,000 asylum applicants back to Mexico, where they were forced to wait for months.
So what does that mean just in practical terms for Mexico?
Right. The president of Mexico has been asked about that in the last few days. And, her answer right now is just, well, we have to kind of inform these people that there is no real path right now to get to the U.S. border and to go into the U.S. And then they have to decide. This is what she said. And, she was asked specifically about repatriations, about deportations, and she said that Mexico would only repatriate them if they are willing, if they agree to it. Now, Mexico's public stance on immigration, as the president describes it herself, is very humanistic. Now, the reality is quite different from that.
Recently, they sent fire in the back of our tent, and sometimes they come here to steal people's stuff. We have a lot of problems here when it's raining, and the tent can't protect us from the coldness. It's very difficult.
So while she may be saying that there will only be deportations of people who want to go back home, I think the reality is that eventually the Mexican government is going to have to make some very hard decisions. In the past has been to bus all these people to the south of the country. This is a technique that's been used throughout the last year to keep people from reaching the U.S. border. So basically, wherever immigration detains you in Mexico, they put you in a bus and they send you back to where you started. It's been a policy of deterring people, because obviously by the time they head back to where they started, it's been days, weeks, sometimes months that they've lost. They've usually used up all their money. So, they're exhausted, they're frustrated, and a lot of people do decide to give up. And that, obviously, when you hear it, is not very humanistic at all. In fact, migrants routinely tell us that Mexico is by far the hardest part of their journey to the U.S. And I'm talking about people who've crossed the Darien Gap, who've lived in the jungle for days or weeks at a time.
The infamous Darien Gap on the border between Colombia and Panama is the only land route between South and North America. Those attempting to cross it risk robbery and death.
So Mexico is a very difficult part of the process for migrants, and I don't think many of them will necessarily want to stay here.
You mentioned that the president wants to have this humanistic attitude towards migrants, but the situation, as you said, is already very tough, right? You have migrant prisons. Migrants themselves have described to the Mexican paper El Universal, talking about Mexico as hell on earth for migrants. I mean, is there a danger of being perceived as the U.S.'s immigration enforcer? And I wonder how that might play politically.
I mean, I don't think that would be new. I mean, I think Mexico, at least certainly for the past year, did that and did it fairly successfully. So obviously, the Mexican government will never accept that. But I think if we look at the facts, they have been the enforcer of the U.S. immigration policy. And this kind of enforcement of this policy came and in December of 2023, the highest numbers ever of migrants to reach the border made headlines everywhere. And it was very detrimental to the Biden administration at the time. And so after this, high-level meetings took place in Mexico City, and suddenly the numbers of people arriving at the U.S. border went dramatically down. Obviously, it's not black and white, and it wasn't just Mexico's policy.
Yeah. I mean, look, one of the issues here is just a lack of information and a lack of cooperation from the Americans. For instance, on Inauguration Day, the CBP-1 app, which is used by asylum seekers to process their applications, just suddenly stopped working. We saw all of these videos, and they were really dramatic. Then Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum asked Trump to maintain it, but then he refused. So can you explain how this unfolded and maybe put some faces to it?
Yeah. Well, for context, the CBP-1 app, the way it works is that it usually takes asylum seekers days, weeks, it could be up to months. I've spoken to people in migrant camps throughout Mexico that have been trying to get an appointment for up to 9 months. So these are people that have been trying to get these appointments for a long time, which means that once you get it, really now finally the end of your journey in sight. So you can imagine the disappointment when suddenly a lot of these people who had their appointment confirmed for January 20th were literally lining up about to enter U.S. territory to go to their appointment, and they suddenly receive a message saying, your appointment has been canceled. This is the end of your process.
Look what it says. May he have compassion and let us cross. May he give us support because we're suffering. 6 months since leaving Venezuela of suffering. I don't know what my life will be from here on.
It is one of the saddest days of my life because I have suffered a lot to get here, to get to the land where I'm stepping on. Across Central America, it is very difficult. They see us as gold mines, as banks. They want to rip us off in any way, be it overcharging us, be it with extortions and kidnappings.
And again, this is asylum seekers. These are people who are fleeing danger from some other country. It's not just people who want to live in the United States.
Donald Trump will tell you these are people who, just want to come into the U.S. and invade his country. We've spoken to a lot of CBP-1 asylum seekers that are Mexican and that are displaced from very, very violent areas of Mexico where they saw relatives being killed in cold blood in front of them. And they or their children were threatened and had to leave basically with whatever they were wearing at the moment. A lot of these people do have very serious security situations back home that they simply can't return to. So what's going to happen to those people? I think we'll start seeing that in the coming weeks and months. It's hard to say at this stage. I think everyone's still in a bit of a state of shock. Again, not because it wasn't expected necessarily. I mean, Trump had spoken about CBP-1 ending. He wasn't happy with it. But maybe there was some sort of hope from people who already had appointments that those would be honored. And maybe it was just a matter of they wouldn't give any further appointments. But the fact that people were literally stopped as they were crossing into the U.S. for their appointments, I think has definitely left a lot of people in shock.
Yeah, maybe just a heads up would have been nice. We'll have more with Julia after a quick break. Julia, let's talk about trade and tariffs. Trump has said he wants to slap a 25% tariff on Mexico, which is the U.S.'s largest trading partner. First of all, what does that even mean exactly? Who feels the brunt of that most directly?
Well, I think both sides Mexico's argument certainly is that both sides would find that to be incredibly detrimental, and which is why I think President Sheinbaum thinks it's not going to be as simple as just imposing these tariffs as he has threatened. As you said, Mexico is the U.S. largest trading partner. I believe it's 80% of Mexican products that are exported go to the U.S. So obviously the relationship is so braided together that it's hard to just kind of from one day to the next imagine these very destabilizing tariffs going into effect. Well, it affects the American consumer who buys products that come from Mexico. And obviously it would also affect the Mexican producers who depend on these products being sent to the U.S. Trump has said that the reason why he's doing that has to do with the amount of fentanyl that's crossing the border and, killing American drug users. And, he has blamed that on Mexican cartels and Mexico's inability to stop that from happening. Mexico, on the other hand, is saying, well, these cartels are fueled by addiction in the U.S. We don't have an addiction problem in the same way that you do. Why is that? And also the weapons that these cartels are using are American weapons that are moving south. And you're also not controlling that.
Yeah, much easier to target the supply side than to acknowledge the demand side. Consistent problem in the war on drugs.
Exactly.
The other topic worth asking about is this executive order that designates the cartels as terrorist organizations. What could be the effects of this designation?
Yeah, I mean, there's been so much, I've been reading so much about that, and it's all quite tricky. I mean, on one hand, while the designation doesn't outright say that the U.S. can now kind of militarily come and invade Mexico and fight the cartels, it does obviously lay the groundwork for, the perception that is possible. And, they may be able to make a stronger argument that because a terrorist organization is operating basically next to the U.S., that they can come in and take military action against them. Now, security expert in Mexico that we've spoken to says the likelihood of that happening is actually, very low. What we ultimately found out is that there's already so many tools that the U.S. has available to fight drug cartels in terms of laws, laws to go after their financial assets and even more, practical on the ground things that they can do that, it may end up being more of a kind of show to kind of, create more awareness of the existence and the operation of the drug cartels than anything that's going to change practically.
Okay, so we've outlined the nature of these problems, all of these things that are going to land right in Mexico's lap. On Tuesday, Sheinbaum said it was important to remain cool-headed in the wake of Trump's whirlwind of executive orders. What's her standing politically in Mexico? I mean, Mexicans have her back, right?
She is incredibly popular right now. She was elected in June in a landslide win after she was basically the hand-picked successor of her predecessor, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, who was also very popular. So yeah, her government has complete control right now, supermajority in both chambers of government. They are very popular, largely as a result of, some social programs that have targeted at Mexico's poorest and which have been incredibly successful for that sector of the population. So, she I think it doesn't have that much for the time being to worry about in terms of how Mexico is receiving this, because there's a lot of people here who love her and who feel that, the country is in the best possible hands and that essentially trust whatever approach she takes to the Trump administration.
Right. Yeah. Look, being popular will help Sheinbaum, at least initially. But I got to say, it's hard to imagine any government being able to manage the logistics and the cost of what's being thrust upon them. I look at Canada, for example. Remember, they took in 3 million immigrants during COVID to try to boost the economy. But then the logistics of dealing with all of that influx of people, it's one of the reasons the Trudeau government collapsed. So I guess the question is, how long a leash do you think voters will give her once the impact really starts to be felt?
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I mean, Mexico cannot cope. I'm not sure any country can, but Mexico can't cope with a sudden influx of millions of people. I mean, as much as she wants to embrace them, to use her word, when they come back and make them feel welcome and give them a card with $100, the equivalent of that in pesos, so that they can get on a bus and get home, whatever home may be for a lot of these people. I mean, it all sounds very nice when you're listening to it, but the reality of that is just completely unsustainable. But I think there's going to be deals worked out behind the scenes, because obviously she's not going to, if she can help it, walk into a crisis where suddenly like millions of people who don't want to be in your country, even if they're from there. I mean, a lot of these people have lived in the US for decades. They have lives there. They have families. They're good standing citizens. So they're not in a position to just be deported and say like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to come back here and take a job making a fraction of what I used to make and go to my town where I don't have anything left, which is maybe has been overrun by violence. I mean, it's unrealistic to think that that wouldn't lead to a crisis. I think Mexico does have some leverage, and I think they will use it once these negotiations really, begin in earnest. And I think we'll see over the next couple of weeks and months what they're able to negotiate, so that this country doesn't descend into crisis with thousands of people being sent back at once.
Which means we're going to have to keep checking in with you as this year unfolds. Julia Galiano, thank you so much for coming on The Take.
Thanks for having me.
And that's The Take. How do you think Mexico can build a working relationship with the new U.S. administration? I will be reading your comments personally. So if you want to catch more episodes like this, make sure you're following our YouTube playlist, which is right here. That's where you'll find all of our recent content, which is updated regularly, so you'll never miss an episode. And while you're at it, please hit that subscribe button so you stay in the loop with all things Al Jazeera English. We'll see you tomorrow.